In 2016, I had just returned to my home state from college and had gotten a really awesome job as a store manager for a local boutique. I loved my job, and even though I had a really young crew 90% of the time, they worked really hard. We were located in an indoor mall, and we were on the top level. Lots of people use the mall for whatever: walking, window shopping, hanging out, and real shopping, obviously. I love meeting new people, so honestly, I really enjoyed it. The night it started, I had my two favorite girls with me, who were 17 and 18. We will call them A and M. They only worked a few hours at night throughout the week, but they were very sweet and fun to be around. So the night started like any other. I was putting new stock out, Em was helping a customer, and I was fixing up the denim wall. My phone rang, and it was my mom, which was weird. She never bugs me during work hours. So I answered and asked what's going on. She replied and told me how she had just watched the news story about a human trafficking taking place around the area of the mall. They had caught a bunch of guys trying to force 2 girls into their truck, and that led them to finding 4 more girls at a house. She felt like she just had to tell me right away so I can keep an eye out, but also watch for the younger girls. I remember telling her thank you and that I'd call her on my way home later. Now 2 hours later, A walks up to me and starts folding pants silently. She's never silent, so I asked, "What's up?" thinking maybe she didn't feel well. She looked at me and very quietly said, "They won't quit staring, and it's really starting to creep me out." I looked in the direction, and she tipped her head to find a group of young men, likely late 20s, just standing outside the shop window staring, pointing, and talking to one another. I told her I'd keep my eye on them and thank you for telling me. To get both girls out of their eyesight, I sent them to clean up the stock and crew rooms in the back. I started doing all the nightly closing paperwork when one man came in. He looked around for a minute and then came up to the checkout and asked me why I hadn't greeted him. I said I simply hadn't heard him come in, and then apologized and asked how I could help him. He ignored my question and asked where the 2 other girls went. I lied and said I sent one home and the other was doing inventory in the back, and I'd be happy to help him with whatever he needed. He just stared at me for a minute before simply smiling. Never one to back down, I smiled back and told him if there wasn't anything he needed, I was going to have to ask him to leave, as it was now 9 p.m. and I was closing up shop. He didn't move, and instead looked down at my name tag. My name is Wren, pronounced like Wren the bird. What he then next creeped me out and nearly made me sick. He looked at me in the eyes, smiled and said, "Aren't birds usually kept in cages?" And that he would see me later, winked, and left. I texted the girls to stay in the back, and I called mall security. Luckily, I knew the officer they sent, and he was a good friend of mine. He came in the back door, and I explained everything. I had him walk them out to their cars, immediately, one at a time. And then he came back to get me. I was finishing up paperwork, and he was standing next to me when he told me not to look up. I asked why, not once stopping my work. He told me they were walking by outside the shop. They freaking waved to the security officer. He told me to just finish up and he'd get me to my car. We were one of the last shops open, so I finished up around 10 p.m. and then had the security officer walk me out the back way and to my car. He told me to get in and lock my doors. He actually followed me out to the highway to make sure I wasn't actually being followed either. I learned later the 2 officers had done the same for my 2 other girls. I talked to my mom the entire drive home. Got home safe and immediately called A&M. Thankfully, they were both home safe. I felt so much better knowing that. I told them that they were going to take the next few days off, then would go to our sister store the town over for a few weeks. Next, I called my district manager and other store manager and explained everything that had happened. I was sent to a different store as well and ended there luckily. But I've never been so creeped out and worried for my coworkers' lives as I was that night. Sorry if that doesn't make any sense. It still makes me ill to think about it. I never disliked my name until then. This has nothing on some of the stories I see on here, but it had my adrenaline at full throttle. I'm a thin, athletic white guy, around 5'9", not the most intimidating presence. but I happened to have a nice bulky coat on that probably added some uncertainty. Also my savior, because as mentioned, I'm not a bear. Anyway, it's 2:30 a.m. or so, and it's my favorite time to do laundry. There's a 24/7 auto-electronic laundromat right by my apartment. There's employees there during business hours. There's roughly an 8-hour stretch where I'm the only one who will always be in the building. Occasionally I'll see an old-timer in around 4:30 to 5, but usually on Sundays, which I avoid. It's literally only a half a mile from my place. I zip down there. It's a cold night, well below freezing. I toss in my clothes, soap, and swipe the laundry card. On my way to grab gas, milk, and deposit something at the bank, and then go back to my apartment to bring some things from inside my car. I do some dishes and decide finally to head back down. I usually just play video games while running my laundry, or just procrastinate in general. My stuff will sit up there for about an hour sometimes, especially when there's no one there, so. But not this time. It's now shy of 3 a.m., and I get the notification that my laundry is done on my phone, as I'm seconds from the laundromat parking lot. I pull in and scan the lot. No one here. Proceed to walk in the front door and immediately notice someone come up on the building from the far side. A guy, maybe 6 foot, with 2 hoodies on and both hoods up. Most of his face was concealed. It's unlocked and often used when the place is busy, but there was no car there. There is a bathroom in the place. As I walk to my machines, which is about the dead center of the building, I thought this person had quickly bolted back outside. Then I notice him again. I think he had ducked, still just by the door. Mind you, we had 2 islands of laundry machines between us. He starts up near the wall, which is on my left. I'm watching him at this point. I was hoping he needed to use the bathroom or something, but he hurried past it. Not a run, but a very quick walk. Now he's on the opposite, near a corner of the laundromat strip, maybe 15 foot away, and just out of my line of sight for a moment. I didn't want to trigger the guy or appear scared, so I continue shoveling my wet clothes into the laundry cart. The adrenaline begins trickling, hair on the back of my neck goes up. Before rounding the corner and crossing back into my vision, he had hesitated. I eventually turned my head to rotate back, and he kind of popped up into the picture. He glanced over, and we made eye contact as I reached in my coat pocket to fist my keys. He continues up the aisle and makes a left back out the side door. I have a little blade on my keys, so I pop that open and proceed to toss my shit into the dryer, while scanning my surroundings the entire time. Eventually, the time came to go back outside. The front doors were automatic, so I had both hands free. I literally walked out of the place wielding a knife, shaking with adrenaline, but it was a ghost town. I then proceeded to my car and went home. Drove my wife into work and waited until about 6 to grab my clothes. My confusion is that I'm nearly positive this person scoped out the laundromat. My machine has a digital timer for the current wash. This guy entered the building within a minute of it going off, and me pulling into the lot. At 3 a.m., a night when it was about 20 degrees Fahrenheit out. Coincidence? Maybe. But I was scared either way. This story takes place when I was 14. I'm now 23. It was late summer, and I was coming home from hanging out at the beach for my best friend Mia's birthday party. When I got off the subway at my stop, I looked at the bus arrival screen. The bus I would normally take home was arriving in an hour. But being a tired 14-year-old girl, I decided to take an alternate bus route home. This was a decision I would later regret. When I got off the bus at the stop, I have about a 10-minute walk to my building. My area at night is pretty quiet, not many cars on the street. But as I'm walking up the street, I hear the sound of an engine nearby. I look over my left shoulder and see a white panel van. I know, how typical. Rolling up the street. I tried to think nothing of it, but when I turned onto my street, the van did too. Now I'm unsettled and start walking faster. This van is driving slowly and never passes me. When I turn up the long driveway to my building, the van once again turns too. Now I'm just scared. The driveway to my building has an ice rink on the side of it with bright lights. So I walk beside the rink underneath those lights. There are small townhouses on the other side of this driveway. The van catches up to me and stops, so I think maybe this person is lost and might ask for directions. I stop, and I stay about 4 feet from the van just in case. I look in the van window and see an older man, starting to bald with black hair and a white t-shirt. I ask if they're lost, and they don't respond. Instead, they try to get me into their van. I say no and start walking, but the van continues to drive slowly behind me. When a red car begins to drive down the driveway, the van drives all the way to the end of the driveway and waits for the red car to turn out before reversing to be beside me again. The man is still trying to get me into the van. I want to make a mad dash to my building, but I'm worried he will see where I live, so I keep walking. When another car comes down the driveway, the van does what I did before and drives to the end and waits for the car to leave. But this time, there's a cab dropping someone off at the townhouses. The cabbie is closing his trunk when he sees me. "Are you okay?" he asks. I tell him how the van has been following me, and every time a car comes, the van drives to the end and waits for it to leave before following me once again. The cabbie tells me he will get in his car, drive to the end of the driveway, and sit there for a bit so I have enough time to run to my building. Tell him okay and thank you. The van is back in line with me again. So the cabbie gets in his cab and drives up the driveway as the van follows. I look and see 2 vehicles sitting there. I run up the rest of my driveway into my building's lobby. My heart is racing. When I get to my apartment, I'm still freaked out. I go into my room and call the cops. While on the phone with the cops, I look out my bedroom window and see that same van. It's slowly driving around my building looking for me. I'm fully panicking. The cops sent officers to sweep the area, but they don't find him. 2 officers came to my apartment and got a statement from me. About a week after this happened, the officers came back to my apartment. They showed me a photo of the man from the van that they were able to get from the security cameras on the side of the building. I told them that the man in the photo was the one that followed me. They told me they had found him and he was being put on the sex offender list. So to the man in the white panel van, let's not meet. This is gonna sound bizarre and made up, but I swear on my left nipple that this happened, and there are several witnesses. Even if I can't explain why someone would do this. I'm fairly positive that this isn't anything paranormal. I live quite a distance off the road, in an unremarkable house on private property. My neighbors are all older family members who go to bed extremely early, and whose children are already grown and out of the house. In summary, there's no mischief makers to play pranks on us here. A few months ago, my mother and I stayed up late one evening watching television together. Around 3 a.m., I turned the television off and decided to go to bed. As I was leaving the room, I began to hear what sounded like carnival music playing outside of my house in the front yard. It was loud and close. My mother heard it too, and immediately went to the window to investigate. She couldn't see anything but darkness. Everyone else was either asleep for the night or away on vacation. The lights were off in all their houses, and none of them would be caught dead listening to anything but country music anyway. We're miles off from the nearest city, so it wasn't a product of noise pollution. You can hear when a car is pulled up in the yard, but there's no sound of a car. The silence where we live is usually deafening. All you can hear is ringing in your ears. And where did the song come from? Who was playing it and why? I was very unsettled by the idea of a stranger in our yard, playing carnival music. As such suggests malicious intent. My father and uncle later mentioned that 20 years ago, when my parents first moved in, the electrician had come to install a ceiling light and stopped in the middle of his work, saying he could hear Pink Floyd playing in the front yard. Neither my father nor uncle could hear it, so they laughed it off and thought the man was just insane. The electrician was freaked out. He kept opening the door and trying to find the source of the noise, but to no avail. It sounds like carnival music. I played the song for my mother, and she began freaking out, saying, "Yes, yes, that's what I heard." Who the hell sits in my yard at 3 a.m. in the middle of nowhere playing the same song, which isn't even a popular song, 20 years later, with no car? Where did they come from? They would have had to walk several miles to get here. Aside from this, the only other strange thing we had experienced would suggest an intruder. We feel and hear knocking on the living room late at night, around the same hour, which sometimes is so intense that the entire wall of the house is rattled and sends the couch against it into a reclining position. There are no trees nearby to tap the glass. No animals except humans could possibly reach it. Fortunately, this has stopped over the last few weeks. Here's an update on the situation, as many people have requested. Shortly after my first post, I had almost convinced myself that our intruder was gone, when I was staying up one night into the early hours of the morning to finish up a bit of homework. I heard a noise in the yard just outside my bedroom. I sat there listening, but could only detect something like machinery. It was not a sound that I recognized, but I almost imagined what was causing the noise, unless the air conditioner was misbehaving. But once it had quieted down, I finished working and went to sleep. About 2 nights later, I heard the loud grinding around the same hour, but again, could not determine the source, however alarming the volume was. The following morning, my father discovered someone had sabotaged our air conditioning unit by removing a piece of its inner machinery and later throwing it into the fan while it was spinning, effectively destroying its blades and a few other pieces. The part had presumably been taken the first time. I was disturbed by the activity in the yard and thrown back in the second time. I had noticed it only because the outdoor unit is mounted against my bedroom. We thought initially that the piece, and forgive me for the ambiguous language as I'm not very technological savvy, had loosened itself and broken down. But we called our repairman, who begged to differ. He was surprised by the degree of damage and insisted he had never seen it happen naturally, suspecting someone had removed several screws and tampered with the unit. He thought my father had attempted to work on it and caused the trouble, but of course, he had not. A few days after the damaged parts had fully been replaced, my mother was leaving for a doctor's appointment when she began yelling and called the family into our yard. Our electrical box was open in the night and left ajar as if someone had been trying to find a wire to cut our electricity or disable the suspected indoor security system. We had been outside several times since the repairman had finished his work, and we are certain he closed the electrical box, if he ever even opened it. We have weathered several severe hurricanes here, and winds are not strong enough to open our electrical box. A person had to have done it. Weeks passed without incident. My parents opted to overlook these concerning happenings. My father tried to explain the air conditioner as a freak occurrence. They purchased a new gun and did little else. Towards the beginning of the summer, my grandfather mentioned that a couple weeks prior, while we were on vacation, he'd seen a red Jeep drive the length of distance from the road through our property to our house in broad daylight. He didn't recognize the driver, but approached and questioned him. The man claimed he was looking for a woman that lived in a trailer. The person he claimed he was looking for had the name of a family friend that lives hours away from us. The man was behaving strangely, and my grandfather was not convinced by his story. He ordered him to leave immediately. Our family that lives around us on the other farm is reinforcing their doors, installing extra locks, and keeping their children out of their yards until we find out what's going on. They won't even let them walk home from the bus stop anymore. I had stopped worrying over it as much because I'd been preoccupied with moving into a new state. But the old knocking returned this evening at around 10 p.m. My parents were watching television together when they heard it. They turned on the porch light and peered out of the peephole of the back door to investigate, but saw no one. At 3 a.m., I was wide awake watching television when it sounded as if someone was forcefully punching the glass at the usual exposed window. Covered it with a blanket as I always do. An hour after I covered the window, I began to hear loud noises from our back porch off of the kitchen, as if someone had stepped onto it. However, it was briefly lived. They apparently weren't walking around, but simply just standing there. About 10 minutes after, I heard yet more knocking, except this time it wasn't on the exposed living room window, but further down the wall the window was on, next to the couch. It was 3 knocks, forceful enough to rattle the wall, but not so much that the couch moved. This is more alarming because it suggests that the trespasser lingers here for several hours at a time, posing many questions. Were you being watched for an opportunity to forced entry? Hasn't the opportunity already arisen in the past and they never took it? Are we being stalked? Do they gather here to drink and get high on the property and then decide in their stupor it'll be funny to antagonize us? Why is it only our house that is targeted and not the other houses on the farm? Why do they walk several miles to come here? Their behavior is escalating, and I wonder if they'll eventually take things further. I woke my mother, and we sat awake together until the sun rose to keep watch. We compiled a list of happenings here that suggest our trespasser visits way more frequently than they knock. Despite no one in the family smoking, and anyone who does smoke living too far away from us to smell it, we often deal with the strong scent of a cigarette around the windows or the front and back doors of the house. This happens at our bedroom windows with alarming regularity. Other times, it's a strange cologne or chemical stench, like a fresh perm. We, of course, remembered how my aunt's dog will bark intensely at odd hours of the night, like they do when a stranger visits. The motion detecting yard light has previously come on when no one is at home at my grandfather's. My mother and I are going on a walk around the perimeter of the house in the morning to look for cigarette butts, and we'll try to convincing our father that we at least need security cameras outside. Even though I think we should involve the police at this point. He's been too indifferent to everything that has happened. It makes it challenging to be proactive about our safety. I've previously made 2 posts about a person that lives in our yard late at night, as well as in the early hours of the morning to harass us. They stand on the porch, tamper with our outside appliances, beat on the windows, break into our electrical box, and repeatedly play an obscure song by Pink Floyd called Cirrus Minor. This has been going on since before I was born, and I'm currently 21 years old. This is the resolution to that situation. We believe the culprit has been apprehended and arrested. Despite the instance of myself and other Redditors, my parents never installed security cameras. My father remained resistant to the idea, most likely because he wasn't willing to admit that something was amiss. In the beginning, he complained about the cost, the possibility of hackers, and the difficulties of mounting a camera. He eventually promised to borrow someone's trail camera, but he never broached the subject with them. I moved to another state, and the need for a camera was no longer at the forefront of my mind. But when I remembered and received my new debit card after some unfortunate identity theft, I offered to pay for one. Told my father that I would personally buy a camera or 2 and have them delivered. Only then did he confess that he was afraid of seeing something spooky on it. He had the childlike idea that if he never saw anything happen, the problem would resolve itself. Despite all odds, the problem did resolve itself. Not long after I moved out, my grandfather, who lives in a separate house on the same farm, came home to find the police cars in his driveway. An officer approached him and asked if he was the owner of the other house on the farm, as he needed to speak to the landlord about his tenants. The house in question is occupied by a late relative's widow, who has a lifetime estate. My grandfather explained that the property is part of the farm, which is owned collectively by him and his daughter. Because of this, he was permitted knowledge of what had happened there. The officer explained everything. Apparently, the widow, who is quite old and infirm, used the death of my relative as an excuse to move in her chronically unemployed, drug-addicted family. Among them, her daughter, her son-in-law's brother, and her nephew. Because they don't own their own separate cars, and we seldom visit the widow, this transition went undetected. Shortly before my grandfather had returned that day, the police responded to a 911 call from the widow. Her nephew is apparently involved in a gang and has violent tendencies. Some conflict arose in the household, probably related to how many drug addicts were stuffed together under a single roof for 24 hours a day. All we were told is that the nephew was becoming violent. When the police arrived, they realized there was an outstanding warrant for his arrest. He was wanted for making meth and for assault. The nephew was hiding from the law at his widow's house. This is the reason his presence was concealed from us on the rare occasion that the widow was outside her home and that we spoke. He was removed from the house and arrested by the officers. Ever since then, there's not been any strong chemical odor outside, and no knocking on the window late at night. We suspect he was aware of this farm long before moving in, and it was his go-to spot for recreational drug use. The widow was around 80 years old and had her first child at approximately 13 with her first spouse. So her nephew is elderly himself and would likely have been doing drugs and playing his Pink Floyd music here 21 years ago too. We're thinking he would occasionally spend the night at the widow's house over the years and walk towards the field near us to do drugs. It makes sense that we never heard a car accompanying the knocking noises, because he didn't own a car, and the house is not far since it's part of the farm. The only incident that remains unexplained is the man who drove to our house when we weren't home and asked my grandfather about a family friend that lives hours away. I wonder if they were looking for that meth head, and were told to give some sort of code to make sure he wasn't at the right house. The name could have just been a coincidence. I had an internet incident a few months later that suggested some stalkerish activity, but it's probably unrelated. I apologize for updating you all so late. I am satisfied with this explanation, since there has been no repeat occurrences after his arrest. This happened in 2016 when I was a 17-year-old first-year college student in film school. I'm now 22, and my name is Julia. I lived alone in my first ever apartment. It was really small, but I was really proud of my independence. I never felt safe in this apartment for several reasons. There were multiple gates in the residence that needed to be opened through a code. Only the people who lived there knew. My door had 3 different locks, and it was right next to the university, so most people who lived in that neighborhood were college students. Nothing bad had ever happened in the neighborhood before. I've always been really careful when it comes to locking my door when I leave my house. I always check twice. So this one time, I leave to go to class and lock my door, but for some reason, couldn't get the key out of the lock. I was completely stuck, so I went to get the caretaker of the building to help me, but he wasn't there. It was starting to get really late for class, so I went to class with the key still in the lock. I took off the keychain first, so it's not too noticeable. When I got home, the caretaker was back, so he came to help me, and we couldn't get it out for at least 15 minutes. Until finally he somehow managed to. He told me that the lock was damaged, but that I didn't necessarily need to change it. If only I lock it once instead of twice. I said okay, and that was the end of it. I really wasn't worried because of how safe I felt in this building. Flash forward to 2 months later. I was taking out the trash one night around 11 p.m. while on the phone with my sister. I remember telling her that I was taking out the trash and that I would take a shower afterwards before heading to a party. As I previously said, I always lock the door, even just to take out the trash because of my lock being damaged, and I only locked it once. When I got back to my apartment, I found the door unlocked, which immediately alarmed me. So I went into the apartment and locked the door immediately with 3 different types of locks. When you walk into my apartment, you have the main room in front of you and the bathroom door immediately to your left. I had left the bathroom door slightly open, enough so I could see a man in my shower, turning his back to me. Naturally, when I saw this, I tried to open the door and leave as fast as possible, except my main lock was damaged from the 2-month earlier process, and I couldn't open it no matter how hard I tried. In this moment, all I could think about was the fact that I had to leave as fast as possible. I jumped out of the window without really thinking. Figured it was the only solution, except I live on the 2nd floor, so I completely smashed my ankles on the landing. I started running in whichever way I could, and when I got a little further from the building, I looked back and a man was there, at my window, watching me run away. I thought of 2 possible outcomes. Either the man was going to jump and chase me, except I wouldn't get far with my twisted ankles, or he would get scared of the height and be locked in my apartment. Thankfully, he picked option 2. I went to hide in a bush a little further on, and then called the police, who arrived in just 10 minutes because I live close to the station. They pushed open my door, and the man was just sitting there on my couch, holding a kitchen knife, waiting for me to come back, like he didn't think I would call the police. They arrested the guy and told me later he had already been arrested for sexual assault, rape, attempted kidnapping, and attempted murder. They also told me how everything had just happened. Like I said, it was a very friendly neighborhood with mostly college students, so he got inside the building by other people holding the door for him. He heard me then telling my sister I was about to take a shower, which is why he was waiting in the bathroom for me. Tampered with my lock while I was taking out the trash. He apparently noticed me on school campus and followed me to my home several times before succeeding to actually get in. He stayed on the inside waiting for me because I had recently changed my phone, and the previous one was still lying on the table, so he thought I didn't have a phone with me to call the police. I don't live there anymore, but after that, to get into the building, we all needed identification proving we lived there. Building IDs were created, and we had to scan them every time. It was the only way to go back inside the building. Nothing bad happened in the neighborhood after that. It's been back to being very peaceful and friendly, fortunately. Hey everyone, thanks for listening if you stuck around at this point. If you haven't yet, please hit the like button, the subscribe button, and that notification bell, so you can be notified when future episodes come out. As always, please leave a comment below of a theme you'd like to hear next. I'm always in need of more stories, so if you have a true scary story of your own, feel free to send it to my email. You can also stalk me on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. All those links are below. Thank you all very much for your support, as I'm obviously a very new channel and new to the narration scene in general. I also got this new commissioned music, this lo-fi music that I'm going to start using and accompanying me with this end narration every single episode, as well as I think I'm just going to loop it a couple of times and just to send the episode out on to kind of just fade, you know, from the scary, unsettling stuff, and then just nice, chill, relaxing music towards the end of it. Let me know if you like that or not, or if, you know, you're not into it. If that's cool too, just let me know in the comments below. Also, I'm curious if you like the ambient noise better, like the rain and thunderstorms and like fire crackling, stuff like that, or if you prefer actual music. I'm definitely gonna have one or the other, but I'll probably rotate between the two every once in a while as well, but I'd like to get some feedback on what people prefer when it comes to background. So put that in the comments below as well if you could. I really, again, seriously guys, I appreciate you all. It means a lot to me. And I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.